See, everybody just looks great. I think it's a collection.
Yeah, head to toe. Describe to me what's the inspiration.
No witnesses for the defense's case, more digital evidence of prostitution and sex trafficking, and new audio messages from the man at the center of this federal criminal case, Sean Diddy Combs. It is a full recap of day 28 of the trial. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law and Crime legal alert. If you received deep bro PA birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. That's right, Morgan & Morgan. They're investigating claims that patients were improperly warned about this risk. It's free to check. Just takes a few minutes and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head on over to com/LCDO to see if you qualify. Alright, so let's talk about what happened today in court. Day 28, let me bring back in Law and Crime's in-court reporter, Elizabeth Milner, who's been there every day for all of the testimony, all the action. Elizabeth, always great to see you, thank you so much. So first up, we found out about scheduling, right? We found out when both sides are going to be finishing up, when the jury might be handed over the case. We even found out how long each side's going to have for closing arguments, which, by the way, I will tell you, I think it's one of the most important parts of this entire trial, given how complicated it is, and how many different elements there are, and how much the jury has to consider, and putting it all into context. Closing argument is so important. So what do we learn about scheduling? Yeah. Well, we learned that this case is wrapping up very quickly. I think in a way that's kind of shocking to even myself, where it's like, oh my god, we're really at the beginning of the end, because from what both parties were explaining in court today, it seems like both sides are ready and geared up for closing arguments to happen as soon as Thursday. And yes, Jesse, both sides are going to have plenty of time to get their final message to the jurors before they go and deliberate, and so each side will have an abundance of time. Pretty much 4 hours for each side, and so the day, as far as Thursday goes, it should take up most of the day for closings. Because at 4 hours each, that's 8 hours, probably a lunch break in between, so we should see you closings happen all day on Thursday, and then because they're going to be taking up most of the duration on Thursday, we can expect that the jury won't even get the case until Friday, and so things are moving pretty quickly now, whether or not the jury actually comes to a verdict on Friday. That's a wait and see, but for the most part we can kind of finally see the beginning of the end with this case. Yeah, 4 hours each for closings. I think they'll probably want all that time. I know that the first thing that's going to happen after the defense after the prosecution finishes up their case, the defense is going to have this Rule 29 motion where basically after the prosecution, the government closes its case. They basically say, Judge, there's nothing for the jury to consider. You look at everything that was presented. You have to enter a judgment of acquittal on these charges because the evidence presented is insufficient to sustain a conviction, probably not going to be successful for them. And then you move into the defense's case, which, by the way, we found out about that too. I mean, there was a point when we thought the defense was going to call a number of witnesses. Is that not true anymore? Are they not calling any witnesses? Are they just putting on what exhibits or something? Yeah, it seems like there was kind of a lot of mixed messaging this morning in terms of whether or not the defense will call witnesses or whether or not they'll just put in a bunch of exhibits. And that'll kind of be the most of their case in chief, but from my understanding of it all, they still plan to call at least maybe 1, maybe 2 witnesses. That is my understanding of everything. I know a lot of people would rather this case kind of wrap up and everything quickly, but it seems again from my understanding that the defense at least plans to put on a couple of witnesses. Now whether or not one of those witnesses is Sean Combs, I doubt that's going to happen, mainly because they planned on summations or closing arguments to be happening on Thursday, but initially, Jesse, they had kind of, I wouldn't say a laundry list, but they had a long, lengthy list of witnesses that they were possibly planning on calling. Now, obviously, that dwindled all the way down, and then initially when we were kind of getting towards the end of the government's cassette, the defense was like, okay, we plan on calling Dr. Bard, we plan on calling Vasha, we plan on calling another witness. And then it seems like that 3-person witness list already trickled down, probably to maybe 1 or 2 of those folks, possibly Vosa Dunlap, possibly Dr. Bard. So we'll wait and see when the defense takes over for their case, but for the most part, it seems like the defense case isn't going to be lasting as long as they initially anticipated, when they initially thought it would be at least, maybe, 2 to 5 trial days. It seems like for the most part it'll be just a day, maybe even a day and a half. Yeah, some outlets are reporting that the defense is not planning on calling any witnesses, so we're getting mixed messaging. I'm happy you were there to straighten it out for us, because I'll tell you, I think it's interesting. If they call no witnesses or they call a limited amount of witnesses, it says something about how they feel about this case. They might feel that through cross-examination of key witnesses, key prosecution witnesses, and maybe just some of the text messages that came out, enough reasonable doubt has formed. There's nothing more for them to do now. You talked about Sean Combs not taking the stand. Yeah, as of right now, based on the scheduling, doesn't appear he's going to take the stand. However, he could wake up tomorrow, it's his decision, and his decision alone. He could wake up tomorrow and say, "No, I want to tell my side of the story." His attorneys can't stop him. He will take the stand. It's up in the air, probably not going to do it, particularly after the scheduling today, but we'll see. I've been shocked before, maybe I'll be shocked again now, after all the scheduling now. After what we can anticipate for the rest of the week, we saw the continued testimony of this special agent for Homeland Security investigations. This summary witness literally summarizing or condensing a lot of the digital evidence in this case, and it seems to me that the prosecutors are really trying to illustrate that this connective thread with Sean Combs, his associates, and Jane, alleged victim too, in this case, to set up all these wild king nights. So you're really placing Sean Combs in the middle of it. Not that he can't say, "Oh, I don't know what was being set up on my behalf. I showed up at a hotel room and I'm shocked to find what I found." Not so quite, and it's either that he was an integral part of this, assuming, at the very least, these were sites of prostitution, which is, transportation to engage in prostitution. The allegation being that he transported sex workers and alleged victims for the purposes of sex work, or at the worst case for him, that these are sites of sex trafficking. So Elizabeth, before we even get into the audio tapes of Sean Combs, I want to ask you that about that separately, so I understand more flight records and the payment of travel. This was all discussed, as well as setting up the rooms for these sexual episodes, right? Yeah, absolutely. And so, Jesse, I will say this about some of the summary charts that the jury was able to see today. It was something that a lot of us in the gallery weren't able to see because it had a lot of sensitive information specifically relating to Jane, and so unfortunately for the most part, especially at the beginning of the day, we didn't see all of these charts and graphs that were all put together, but I was able to try to jot down as much as I could, especially as Maureen Kami was kind of going pretty fast with this witness. But for example, we heard about one particular kind of flight summary chart that was between September 24th of 2022 and September 25th of 2022, and the location was Mapleton Home, which is Diddy's residence over in Los Angeles, as well as in Vegas, to where the names associated with that particular time frame were Jane, Sean Combs, and Paul being an entertainer that Jane and Sean Combs would use in their hotel nights. And so the jury was able to see kind of financial records, that being $2,500 that was sent over to Paul, the flight records. I wasn't able to write it down as fast as I possibly could, but there were flight records that were attached to that, but then also there were just more charts just really talking about the payment. So for example, there was one payment from September 17th of 2023 through September 19th, 2023. It was about a hotel booking, particularly the Trump Hotel in New York and the Whitby Hotel. To the names associated with that particular booking were Jane, Sean Combs, Robert, and Cabra, and then Jane, she had a flight out from LAX to JFK. Cabra from Atlanta to Newark, and then Newark back to Atlanta, where the jury was able to see Venmo payments totaling $1,000 that was sent to Robert. Then they were able to see text messages associated with just kind of the financial records associated with Cabro, where Jane texted Cabro saying, "I'm going to check on the status of the cash for you." Then we see more things or we hear about more charts that have to do with Jonathan Perez, one of Sean Combs' assistants, Jane and Cabra. It was assigned to the Trump Hotel room 0508. The arrival date was around that same time frame, September 17th of 2023, and then the payment method was an Amex, and the account holder that being Sean Combs. And so the jury was able to kind of see all of that, including an American Express credit card bill where there was a charge for the Trump Hotel for $259,711, another charge for $2,490. 17. They were able to see transportation. It was through Premier Travel and JetBlue. JetBlue obviously being an airline, and that was transportation in relation to Jane, and kind of how she was able to possibly get over here to New York. And then the account holder for that was Jessica Ruiz. However, what we know about Jessica Ruiz as she was a travel agent that Sean Combs would use in order to kind of set up these arrangements, and so the flights were paid for with Amex under Jessica Ruiz's name that was also under Bad Boy Entertainment or Bad Boy in general. Then there were just more records for the flight for Cabru, again around the same time frame, that being September 18th of 2023. Through September 19th of 2023 the account holder was under Jane's name. However, there was a wire transfer to Jane Doe from Sean Combs, and so I think that was another kind of point where they were saying even though the account holder might be assigned to Jane, the money that was coming in according to the government was first coming in through a wire transfer from Shan Khan, so that way Jane was able to book this flight or get whoever over to wherever they were going to be in terms of planning for hotel nights. And then there were emails even between Robin Greenhill to Team Combs where Robin sent a screenshot where the message included in that particular screenshot was, "Hey, please send Jane $5,000. And so the jury was able to see even more charts of services that were received from Brendan Paul Cabra Williams travel agency charges other charges, including just 2 hotel rooms, and so it was a lot of just charts, first of all, but also just a way for everything to just be in one place in terms of if a flight was booked for this particular date. Here are all the financial records associated with that, and it seems like from the government's kind of argument about this all, is that all roads kind of lead back to Sean Combs, and in terms of who was the one paying for all of this to be happening, all for the entertainers, and even in this case, for Jane to be coming out to these hotel rooms, and in this case New York, but also in other places like Los Angeles and Vegas too. That's why these summary witnesses are so important, because you heard the idea that Sean Combs had been paying or arranging for these workers and their travel and their transport, and also the alleged victims in this case, but it was a little nebulous, it was a little confusing. So now you have a summary witness who really summarizes it, makes it clear, makes it a timeline, and again, this helps support the charges of transportation to engage in prostitution, transporting sex workers and alleged victims for the purposes of sex work. It also helps with racketeering, right? The more that the government can say that Sean Combs was using his inner circle, was using his businesses, was using his resources to facilitate what the government basically says is not only illegal activity but evidence of sex trafficking, right there, saying Jane was sex trafficked. That's how you get to racketeering. That's which sex trafficking is one of the underlying crimes of racketeering, but it's also, you talk about a criminal agreement, a conspiracy. That's what you need, him agreeing with others to facilitate this illegal conduct, and of course, the more they show this, the more they're saying it's evidence of sex trafficking of Jane. But I mentioned the inner circle, my understanding there were messages from Combs's inner circle, right, which is important for racketeering. Again, the more you say those people, those associates, that security, those assistants were helping him to do that, that is key. What did we learn about the messages from Combs' inner circle? What kind of messages were presented for the jury? Well, it seems like in addition to just the messages that the jury was able to see between Sean Combs and Jane, or Jane and an entertainer, or Sean Combs and an entertainer, there was still things that were happening kind of behind the scene, behind the scenes in terms of his employees kind of handling everything, so that way the rooms would be ready, that way everyone kind of knew what the plan was for either the weekend or for these hotel nights, and so the jury was able to see a lot more messages and even heard some audio messages to just about everything that went into the alleged Combs enterprise kind of planning these hotel nights and what they were doing in terms of that. So for example, there were messages between none other than Christina Courtroom and Sean Combs, where there were some audio messages that were played. We weren't able to hard hose because it was one of those things that was under seal, and then the government was worried about sensitive information relating to Jane being out there. So the first couple of batches of audio messages were headphones only, so unfortunately we couldn't hear those. But what we did know is KK's response to some of these audio messages that included Christina Courtroom saying okay, she's going to come, she'll meet us in Vegas. Sean Combs says okay. He sends another audio message again, one that we can't hear. Christina Courtroom says something along the lines of whatever you want, by the way, your nightstand has plan B. Sean Combs liked that particular message. He also said, do you think the other girl will come? Christina Courtroom responds, Sean Combs sends another audio message that we aren't able to hear, and then he also texts something along the lines of keep home girl, please. I'm not sure which homegirl he was in he was referring to in those particular messages, but then Christina Courtroom responds, working on drip, Jess will work on rooms plan B is a nightstand, and then she kind of listed them out, but they were going so fast that these were all kind of in listicle. So it was like first working on drips, second we'll work on rooms, third plan B as a nightstand, and then Benny the jeweler can get back to us, th. That was kind of the gist of that particular message between Christina Courtroom and Sean Combs, but then there were other messages to between Jane and Christina Courtroom where Jane is telling Christina, hi Kay, okay, we spoke. And this was something along the lines of what days are best for her to come and stay, and then we see, or we hear about more messages between Sean Combs and Jane where he's saying good morning, the countdown begins, Jane is saying, yay, can't wait, and then more messages just between the assistants where Jonathan Perez, who was an assistant who had even testified in this particular trial, and Fayum, who was one of Diddy's security guards, where Jonathan Perez messages Fayum and says Trump team says there's a private entrance. Fayum responds, yes. We're pulling up, Jonathan says, in the elevator with Jane. But in addition to Jonathan saying that he was in the elevator with Jane, we see messages from Fayum to Jane where he's saying we'll be there in 10 minutes with cash then. Jane messages Cabral, hey, I need your driver's license, and then there were messages even between Brendan Paul and the people who set up the IVS, and that's something that dates all the way back to Cassie's lawsuit where she says these really long and intensive freak-offs, that they would just need these 4 drips in order to recover, and according to Jane's testimony, it was kind of the same instance where these hotel nights, in her case, would go on for days and hours on end, that they would just need IVs in order to just recover from them, and so the jury was able to see text messages between Brendan Paul and the people who set up those IVs, where the people who set up the IV said good morning, please let me know what type of bags that they would like, also, are we doing the same IVs on all 3? Then Brendan Paul says, I'll keep y'all posted, all IVs will be the same. Then Brendan texts about needing Benadryl in the IVS too, and then there were even more messages that included messages between J9 to Fayum, where and these are both security guards that worked for Sean Combs, where J9 says to Fayum, Asa, I grabbed one OK from Safe for PD. I have it in my possession, I'll let you know when I hand it over. Then there are messages between Sean Combs to Jane where he says I can't have Paul at my house. Jane says yeah, we know baby, and so. It seems, Jesse, that honestly a lot of text messages were really just showing, just kind of, even though maybe Sean Combs and Jane were together in a hotel room, they were with whomever inside that hotel room, that there were still kind of workings that were happening on the outside in terms of obtaining the cash, getting the cash to Sean Combs, or even in some instances, Jane, and if it wasn't through maybe possibly a wire transfer or Cash App, Venmo, any of that sort, that it would just kind of be cash that would either be left at the hotel or in an envelope and just away. That was kind of, given to the entertainers in a kind of, a discreet type of way. Yeah, look, if we say that all of these assistants are offshoots of Sean Combs, it connects him back to these alleged criminal sexual episodes, it helps establish a criminal enterprise. You go to the opening paragraphs of whichever indictment you want to pick, that Sean Combs was using his businesses and his resources and is in his circle and his associates to engage in the sexual exploitation and abuse of women. If the jury accepts that these are instances of sex trafficking, this is key evidence. The text messages are so important, right? The flow of money, the travel receipts, so important, and the more that the jury can accept, everybody knew what was going on, everybody was on the same page, everybody knew the goal was to make Sean Combs happy. That's how you get to a common enterprise, right? A common purpose for racketeering, and also, it helps with the sex trafficking charge as well. And then we get to the audio messages. So for me, I'm reading the transcript, there's one thing to have text messages, which I think are compelling evidence, but what to hear Sean Combs' own voice, these audio messages. What are these voice notes? These voice notes, right? I think were key for the prosecution to tie him further to, again, transportation to engage in prostitution, sex trafficking, if they're tying him to these sexual episodes, setting up these events, paying for these events. What were these audio messages that the jury heard and that you heard? Yeah, so it was something that obviously. We've been following this case pretty closely, so we all know what Sean Combs sounds like outside of a courtroom. Just in any other type of atmosphere, outside of the federal court building right behind me, but for the jury, I'm suspecting that most of them haven't really heard Sean Combs' voice outside of this trial, and so it might be interesting for them to kind of hear how he's talking in these audio messages, his demeanor in these audio messages, because for the most part, Jesse, when we were hearing these audio messages, his tone was either laughing or a little more upbeat. Sometimes, you couldn't tell necessarily if he was being sarcastic or if he was being serious. And so it's all about the jurors' respective kind of interpretation of how they feel listening to this, but I thought it was interesting kind of hearing these audio messages that were played, and we're in 2025, and so a lot of people send voice notes in terms of or excuse me, not in terms of, but instead of just sending a text message back, and it seems like Sean Combs would often use audio messages or voice messages in order to kind of get or not get what he wants, but more so ask for what he wants in terms of what he needed for, and in this case, these hotel nights, so there are messages audio messages from Sean Combs to Paul, for instance, Paul being an entertainer that they used where Sean Combs can be heard saying, "Hey, are you in New York? We'll be in Brooklyn tonight." And then Paul later responds that he's actually in Los Angeles. There were some messages that were played at the beginning of court today. Again, it was a bunch of messages. Probably about 5, 6, 7 or so messages that unfortunately we weren't able to hear, likely because of the sensitive information relating to Jane and possibly her true identity. Which is why they just kept the headphones on, but also because of little technical issues that happened this morning too. But there were more audio messages where Sean Combs is saying to Paul, "Hey, yo, hit me when you're close." In terms of him coming over to a hotel night, because this particular booking that it fell under was for the Laramie Hotel in Los Angeles, that being from the November 8th of 2021 through November 10th of 2021 kind of time frame. So it was all kind of associated with that particular message, but then there were also messages, or excuse me, not particular message, particular flight, but then there was also messages, between Sean Combs and none other than Christina Courtroom herself. And so there was one particular message that was again around that same time frame, November 9th of 2021. So still kind of under that booking for the flight summary charge chart where Sean Combs says, "Hey KK, I don't know why I'm even calling you about this, there's no more baby oil. But yeah, I can't believe I'm looking for baby oil in this mother, there you go." And even when Sean Combs was kind of saying that I'm not doing it any justice by kind of repeating that, because he said it in kind of like in a joking type of way, and it kind of maybe showed to the jurors, Christina Courtroom and Sean Combs's relationship in terms of how he was able to just ask her for these types of things. Maybe with no questions asked, but in just such a way that was just very light in terms of him asking for more baby oil, and he can't believe that he has to go and search for baby oil given how many kind of bottles of baby oil were also found. And then there was also another audio message between Christina and Sean Combs, and all the times I'm saying Christina Courtroom and Sean Combs, it's always Sean Combs sending these messages to Christina Courtroom. So we're not seeing any type of audio notes or hearing any type of audio messages that are being sent back from Christina Courtroom. She's always kind of texting back whatever Sean Combs says in an audio message. And so there was one again that same day where Sean Combs says, "Yes, and I'm going to need you to hit Young and tell her I had to run out of town like a family emergency." And then there was another audio message again, that being from Sean Combs to Christina Courtroom, where he says, "Can I get vegetable soup? Yeah, can security or something bring me some money I need? Like $5,000, can you bring me what I need so I don't have to keep bothering y'all?" And then later he asked in another audio message, can y'all bring me some?" And so these were just some of the audio messages that were heard from Sean Combs to Christina Courtroom. But then there were also audio messages from Sean Combs to Frank, for instance, and there was also messages from Sean Combs to Jane where he says, "Yeah, I sent you 15K baby girl." And then to Frank he said, "Yeah, make sure you have the room set up the right way." And so again, these are just typical instances where it seems like Sean Combs was kind of using these audio messages, one being in the know of kind of what was going on and what the plan was for those evenings in terms of these hotel nights, and just how his employees would kind of help set them up, and if he needed anything else, he would just send an audio note to his respective assistants, but also just messages confirming that he needed money or he needed to send money to. Yeah, I think in my opinion, one of the most damning ones is I believe he sent one to his travel agent and goes, "Hey Jess, I need to get him from Atlanta to here, let me know, hit me up if you're talking about transportation to engage in prostitution." And he's literally saying, "I need him transported, I need what this sex worker transported. That's a problem, and you talk about I sent you 15K baby girl, or make sure the room is set up right." Look, on one hand, it easily feeds into the prosecution's narrative that he was at the center of all this, he was setting all of it up, he knew what was going on. The defense could say again, all of this is consensual, nothing about this was illegal, of course. He was setting up these voyeuristic sexual escapades, but Jane agreed to it, Cassie agreed to it, everybody agreed to it. And really, if he was the head of this criminal enterprise, if he was engaging in a pattern of illegal conduct, would he have voice messages? Would he have text messages? Wouldn't he try to insulate himself a little bit more if he's really the mafia. King boss, why have all these connective threads? Why have all this digital evidence? Wouldn't he be a lot more careful, I imagine? Or I wonder if that's going to come up in closing arguments from the defense now. You saw a lot, you heard a lot, but you didn't see everything, right? Because Elizabeth, I understand that the jury saw more sex tapes while this agent was being questioned by the prosecution, right? I mean, we don't know what those are. You don't get a chance to see them. It's only for the jury's viewing. Can you try to explain